So weakness of self, a spiritual malady that I would argue that most, if not all of us, post-industrialized consumerists, doom-scrolling, confused fools are suffering from to some extent. And is ruining not only our lives, but the world itself. Most of us don't really know what to answer when asked, who are we really? Which is a kind of a remarkable fact, right? How can we not know ourselves like we are ourselves? How can we be such mysteries to ourselves? And part of the answer is that we suffer from a weakness of self. There is not a lot of identity in there, which is our own, which is not planted. And that is a major existential problem for the individual. To go through life kind of like a ghost. So what do we mean by weakness of self? Well, if we take a long, hard look in the mirror, what we'll realize is that we have allowed ourselves to become avatars for ideologies, for thought trends, for fashion, for consumerism. We've become uncritical, unskeptical. We don't know who we are deep down. And because of that, we are so easily manipulated and turned into tools by forces larger than ourselves. All of it because we suffer from a weakness of self. We don't know what we stand for, and therefore we also don't know what we don't stand for. And thus we are indoctrinated into something which is not ourselves. The examples are manifold. We have allowed ourselves to dissolve ourselves into society in a way that has made the group more important to us than our own individuality. We have allowed ourselves to get stuck in a state of low self-insight, surfing on the surface of our own personalities. We've lost our authenticity as expressed through our actions or our way of doing business on social media, showing the world a highly curated version of ourselves. We don't know where our thoughts come from. We don't realize how much of our thoughts and even our emotions have been planted within us by forces trying to reduce us to consumers, to economic units, basically. And so if we think that our fashion choices are ours, and they just by coincidence change every 3 months, well, then we have been fooled. And this manifests in our opinions, in our worldviews, in our entire existential horizon is to some extent not our own, because we have sold our souls to forces beyond ourselves. We invest ourselves in certain opinions, certain political stances, because we don't know who the fuck we are. And so it becomes easier for us to just almost pick and choose a personality from the shelves that we are presented with by politicians, by the media, by corporations trying to make money off us. And so we have let our desires become hijacked. We don't even know what we want or what we don't want deep down. And so we're bamboozled into spending our time on activities like consumerism and others that has nothing to do with our own spiritual development. It's all personas and masks that we kind of pick and choose and put on and take off and shift around because it's as if there is no one in there. There's just all the masks. It manifests in our conformity, in our adherence to certain thought patterns, certain sets of values, and it's driven by our fear of in-group, out-group dynamics. And that is a situation which is not only represents the selling of our souls, it is extremely dangerous for the world. The world needs you as an individual with your unique views, thoughts, values, morals, your unique ethos, basically. And so how have we ended up here, you might ask? Well, it starts early, right? It starts in childhood, it starts in school in a certain sense, and this comes from a teacher. I have deep respect for the profession of teaching, but we won't get around the fact that even school is a conformity project, right? It is a project designed to take children and make them behave, sit in rows, learn to say the right things and act in the right way so that we can participate in a culture and a society which in many respects don't give a shit about us. And so from an early age, we're taught basically to become economic units instead of self-actualized sovereigns, valuing group affiliation over self-actualization and individuation. But there are certain paradoxes related to this, right? Because it means that to a certain extent, I would argue to a pretty vast extent, we become actually, through this process of the weakening of the self, we become our own worst enemies, right? We end up doing things, acting in ways that are not good for our own lives, for our own thriving. Like, say, for example, uncontrolled consumerism or adherence to certain fashion trends or thought trends, reducing ourselves to avatars for ideologies, basically. And this is exactly, I think, the point that the writer Alan Harrington is aiming at when he says, we must never forget that we are cosmic revolutionaries, not stooges conscripted to advance an order that kills everybody. Let's give ourselves a moment to just consider this and ask ourselves, in what ways have we allowed ourselves to be reduced into avatars for particular ideologies, thought trends, or a set of ideas that are really not our own? And what is it within us that has allowed us to engage in such extreme degrees of self-abandonment? For me personally, I think, to be honest, that some of the deeper mechanisms driving this is really a fear of in-group, out-group dynamics. Like, once we really hone our sensitivity to it, it becomes quite obvious how many corners we cut off ourselves in order to be part of a group, in order to keep the atmosphere pleasant within a discussion. We might abandon ourselves in a whole host of ways. And when we do this enough, we lose connection to our deepest core, right? And we lose our courage and our ability to say, I don't stand for this. I will not participate in this. I will actually live my life in a proper way instead of just allowing myself to become a foot soldier for mechanisms that I don't even know what are. So how do we break free from this mental prison? Well, step number one, obviously, is doing something we don't want to do, which is to acknowledge the degree to which we have allowed ourselves to become reduced into these avatars. Acknowledge the degree to which we don't really know our own deepest desires, nor what drives them. To acknowledge also how this lack of self-insight makes us vulnerable to external mechanisms and external forces pushing us, indoctrinating us, trying to manipulate us into certain ways of thinking, certain ways of living our lives, certain values, certain ethos. And so the first step must be to acknowledge that we do suffer from a weakness of self, but to do that based on the premise that we don't want to acknowledge it, right? So there's a wall of fire here. There is a kind of a painful realization about ourselves that we have to muster the courage and find the integrity and the self-insight to actually perform on ourselves and truly look ourselves in the mirror and realize and acknowledge that this is the case. We have abandoned ourselves into this weird state, because there is something embarrassing about acknowledging this self-abandonment, right? But the beautiful thing about this and about the mechanism of the wall of fire is that once we muster the courage to actually acknowledge this, despite the embarrassment, on the other side, we will find a kind of liberation, basically. Because now, once we realize that we have abandoned ourselves and allowed ourselves to basically suffer from this weakness of self, we can start asking ourselves some pretty powerful questions like, what are my deepest desires really? What do I stand for? And why do I stand for it? Is it thoughts? Is it ideas? Is it values that have been planted within me? Or is it actually something growing out of my individual, authentic, integrated self? We get to ask ourselves, who do I really want to be? Like, what does the best, most integrated, highest evolved version of myself look like? Like, how can I manifest my ultimately truest self with absolutely disregard to whatever this culture, the people around me, my job, my church, whatever is trying to turn me into? And of course, as always, if you're willing to share any tips or tricks on how to break free from this weakness of self, do share them. Furthermore, I deeply, deeply think that we all should